first of all, I was looking at bees yesterday. They had looked at the bees on April 1st, and the bees were all healthy and crackling. We looked at them yesterday, and they had lost 2 hives. The colonies or bees were actually gone. And with the 3rd colony, there was a few bees left, but most of the bees were gone, including the queen. I'm gonna let so at any rate, so you're looking at your colonies of bees. You're going to get a good sense pretty quickly of what the size of the colony is, if it's a good size for this time of year. For the most part, the bees should be like boiling out of the top of either a deep with a medium or 3 mediums with a super on top. They should be boiling over the top. You want to make sure that they are in a good mood. You should hear like a light buzzing, but not that angry kind of sound that they make when they're angry. I looked at some bees on Saturday, and they were very angry with us, and we were pretty badly stung because it was about ready to rain. You want to make sure that you get a good sniff. I don't have a very good sense of smell, but I can tell if there's something wrong. If it's a kind of a funny odor, I start looking for signs of Nosema or American firebrood or something like that. So just to get a general idea of if you get that good honey smell or not. And then you want to get an idea of what your proportion is of bees to frames of brood. And for you who are beginners, I should ask how many of you are new beekeepers. Your typical brood boxes. You're going to have this area down here where you have the sealed brood, or the brood being sealed. You should have like a rainbow of pollen. Right now the bees are bringing in bright red and like a muddy yellow and orange pollen, and then they're going to have the sealed honey up here. Okay, new bees. Good. So when you're looking at your colonies of bees, the first thing to remember is to take out a frame on the edge first. You don't want to pull out the first frame in the middle because you could be squishing your queen. So start out by pulling out a frame on the side, and there may or may not be much going on the side frames. Put that out and lean it on the side of the colony. Then you just kind of slide your frames over and pull them out. So you're not causing as much disruption in the colony. Just a general rule of thumb to make sure you're not spreading diseases, potential diseases. Get a general sense of the activity of the hives before you even go into them. Look at your strong hives first and leave the weak ones to last. That way, if there is some kind of a disease, even if it's just a Nosema, you're not going to be spreading the spores from the potentially diseased hives into your healthy hives. And then no matter how many, whether you consider yourself a newbie or an experienced beekeeper, make sure that you sanitize your tools before you get into your vehicle to go to the next yard. You want to it doesn't take more than a couple spores to spread diseases. So make sure that you clean your hive tool, switch your gloves, or clean your gloves if you use leather gloves, or your hands. Make sure that you sanitize everything before you go into your next yard. You can use bleach or 80–90% alcohol. They're both really hard on your hands. I tend to use rubber gloves, so I can just throw them in the trash can. At this time of year, if they're not already overflowing with bees, you want to have at least like 3 to 4 grapefruits worth of honeybees. You should have at least 4 frames that have bees and at least some brood on it, and you want to have both capped brood and young larvae and eggs, and I've got pictures of them coming up. Here is number 2 queen. She was artificially inseminated. She's a fancy queen that we have at the Central Ohio Beekeepers yard, but you just want to make sure that you have a good queen that's working hard. This is not the greatest picture in the world, but it shows the eggs. The way that you look for eggs is you kind of hold the frame of hold the frame up so the sun is shining over your back into the frame, and you just kind of hold it just right, and you'll see these little eggs in there. So you want to be looking at eggs. These are, you can see the larvae in here, little larvae in there, and there's the egg there, and these are your brood, your larvae who are about ready to get capped. So you should see plenty of that. This was a frame that was taken about 3 weeks ago now at the Koa bee yard. This is what you want to see, that perfectly rounded area of brood, sealed brood. There's pollen in here. It's not the greatest picture, but you can see the colored pollen, and then the honey up in the corners. So this is ideal. This is what you want to get. It's just a close-up showing perfectly rounded brood area. You may not see that. This is just a fancy queen doing her job. Sometimes it's not quite this perfect, but if you have that, you know, pat yourself on the back. You're doing it right. So you want to make sure that you have a queen. Oh, you can't hear it. You may have like a slow speed of your audio. So you want to make sure that you have those larvae so you know that you're queen right, as they say. You want to have 3 to 4 frames of brood in there. If you have a 10 frame box, you want to have at least 3 to 4 frames per box. You want to look at your bottom board and dump all that stuff out several feet away from the hive if possible. Look for rodent droppings, any sign of the small hive beetles. You may see wax moth caterpillars down there. You know, just look to see what's there and then get rid of it. You know, take it several feet away and dump it. Okay, here, this is a queen cell right here. These bees have made, or in the process of making themselves a new queen. You see this spottiness. This is because the bees have been emerging. So if you see the spotty brood pattern like that, it's because the bees are already emerging. So the queen will start going back and refilling these. So don't be alarmed if you see this spotty kind of brood pattern. This is what you don't want to see. It's not the greatest picture. I apologize for that. But this is that same bee yard, but a different colony. These are real bumpy looking, real lumpy. This is a drone layer, or what they call a laying worker. The queen is gone. She's been gone for at least 3 weeks, and you now have the sterile females laying eggs. The way to get rid of that, if you can, is either take the frames out several feet away and kind of shake them in. You can try to put a queen in there in a cage to see if they'll accept her, but sometimes if it's been too long, they won't accept her. But this, I apologize, it's not a very good close-up, but it's very bumpy looking. It's not smooth because these are going to be those sterile females. So I want to move into the 5 pests and diseases that we want to be looking for when we're looking at our hives. And I'm going to go through, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the varroa mite because Dr. Tu is going to be talking about them. But the main thing that I want you to be aware of is that the varroa mites have now been found to vector these viruses that the honeybees are getting, which is one of the main causes that of a colony collapse disorder. We've had these in Ohio since the 80s, and they are probably here to stay. So we need to be able to keep their level down as much as possible all season long. Don't wait until fall to get that population of mites down, because they are vectoring those viruses. So here's just a close-up. This is probably a male pupa or male larva here, and you can see that mite. So you can see these little varroa mites. What we did is we pulled I've got a picture of that coming up. We pulled some of the drone pupae off, some of the sealed brood off, and we saw that there. So just another image. You can see these varroa mites very easily when you start looking at them. So even if you have no other diseases, a colony that's badly infested with varroa mites is gonna die on its own, because it just takes all the energy away from the bees and it weakens them. Trying to read your emails as we go, your texts. It reduces the lifespan of the summer workers. They don't have the the body weight or the amount of fat in their bodies to be able to live as long. They usually can't function as well in the colony. They don't fly as well. And when the queen is laying her workers for the fall-winter population of bees, those bees are usually not able to survive over the winter time. So that's one of the reasons you get winter death, is because those bees had viruses. So they can't fly. They're begging for food because they can't get the food for themselves. So they're spreading the viruses as they feed each other, and they can't function as well in hive. So this is just a kind of a rough graph showing the mite populations building as the summer progresses. If we can keep the mite populations down here, you're not going to have the virus problems or the other diseases that mites can carry, and you're not going to have that overall weakness and inability to function that you would up here. So we want to keep our mite level down here, not control it when they get up here. So it's just this poor little bee. She's got 3 mites on her back, and you know, obviously you know that. I'll talk about that. The viruses in Ohio. There's 3 main ones, and I think I talk about that up ahead. So there's 3 ways that you can monitor for mites in your colonies, and the easiest is just to use a cappings scratcher, which is what we were doing at the bee yard, and I have a picture of that coming up. You basically just pop the top off of the male larvae and male pupae, and you'll see these mites. So you're not going to be counting the number of mites per drone brood. You're going to be counting the total number of mites that you see per 10 to 15 pupae that you look at. So here's just a picture. This is your capping scratcher, and you're basically picking just the top off, and this is the ideal stage that you want to be looking at, more so than the larvae. So this is just a picture showing them like down here. This would be easy just to peel the top off of these. These are all male pupae. Just pop the top off and you're going to see those mites really easily. So another simple way to monitor for mites is just to use the screen bottom board. Not only does the screen bottom board help to monitor the mite population in the colony, but it also allows for better air circulation, which is better for the bees and less desirable for the mites. So you count the number of mites that fall. You put a sticky board under your screen bottom board and count the number of mites that you find on there after 24 hours. They say that this test is 90% reliable, so it's a good way for you to determine what your mite population is. It's not going to control them by itself, but it helps you monitor it. So this is just showing somebody pulling the sticky board out of their screen bottom board. And here's your screen bottom board just to see, what it looks like. And this is just the sticky board. Looking at it, you can see the mites. The mite. These people have way too many mites for any time of year. So if you have 40 or more mites on this board in 24 hours, you need to treat with something. You need to cut your mite population down. This is just another image showing that this mite, when you see the bees that have their wings kind of out at angles like this is called a K-wing, which is a symptom of a virus. This little bee down here, she's got a really deformed, crinkled wings. It could be a symptom of deformed wing virus. And I'll address the question that Lynn just asked. I've got that answer up ahead. So the third way to monitor for the mites is just to use the sugar roll. You can use sugar, you can use the ether roll, but the sugar, at least if you use the sugar, it doesn't hurt the bees. You can let them go afterwards and they'll fly back home again. So you basically put I have a picture of this showing up ahead. You basically put a cup of bees in here, half a cup of bees in in that jar that has a screened lid. You add about 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar and kind of shake it and roll it around, and then you're going to knock the bottle upside down. This one here, you're going to knock it upside down, and you're basically going to be shaking the sugar and the mites out of that screen lid. So you're going to see the mites in that white sugar, and you get your idea of how many mites you have per bees. You can do it if you figure you have about 300 bees and half a cup of bees. There's 300 bees in there. You can use alcohol and test it that way. It's basically the same thing, only you're pouring the alcohol out and leaving the bees in the jar. The alcohol and the mites are going to come out through the screen lid. Or you can use ether. And basically, again, you take the 300 bees, you put it in a jar and give it about 3 squirts of ether in there, which is engine starter fluid. Then you roll the jar around and around, and the mites actually stick to the jar. So any of the 3 of those will work just fine. So the idea with this is that we want to keep the mite population down as low as possible. I hope I can answer all these questions at the end, because I can't talk and answer questions at the same time. But I hope to get all of these questions answered. We want to be able to maintain the pest status as low as possible. We want to try to be as friendly to the bees and the environment as possible. You're going to have mites. Unfortunately, the mites are here to stay. And small hive beetles are probably here to stay. But we can keep our population down as low as possible. Obviously, we don't make a lot of money keeping bees, and we don't want to be spending a lot of money on treatments. So we want to try to keep our costs down as low as possible. And you're not going to be doing these controls by count, or you're going to be doing it by the population of bees. By the population of the pest, I'm sorry. So try to keep your bees as healthy as possible. And so, okay, so you have you found mites on your one hive, so you treat that one. You need to treat all of your hives, because mites are great hitchhikers. They hitchhike on the adult bee. Bees are dropping those mites off on the flowers, which another bee picks up. Also, as the bees are coming back to the hive, sometimes they drift. A bee that's supposed to be going into number 97 ends up going into 173. So if you have a high mite population in one hive, you're going to have mites in all of them. So the county apiary inspectors usually assume that if you have mites in one colony, you've got mites in every colony in that yard, because mites, again, are great hitchhikers. Yes, the amount of shade, the more shade you have, the more likelihood that you're going to have a higher mite population. I've also noticed that bees in the shade tend to be a little bit more cranky. It may just be my perception, but they seem to be more cranky in the shade. But if their bees are not getting good sun, or proper sun, especially in the morning, they're less active in the morning, and they're more likely to they're less likely to be able to fight the mites off. So the more sun is better for the bees and less desirable for the mites. So here, this is what you were asking about before. Depending on what monitoring program you use, if it's early spring or summer, anytime through mid-June, if you have more than 5 or 10 mites on that sticky board within 24 hours, you want to treat with something. You don't have to use the heavy-duty stuff. Oh, they are more cranky. You want to treat with something. If you're testing the adult bees with your sugar roll or the ether roll, if you have 3 or 4 mites per 300 bees, which doesn't seem like much at all, you want to treat with something or other. If you're doing the capped brood, which is usually the males are more bumpy looking, and hopefully I have a picture that's showing up so I can point it out to you. If you have more than 5%, so you don't have to do 300 of the capped brood, you can do 10. And if over 5% of the capped brood that you look at have a mite on them, one or more mites, you want to treat with something. So you don't have to use the strong stuff, but you need to do something to keep that population down. Robert was asking about if one colony has a lot of mites, why treat the whole yard? You want to at least check several of the other colonies in that yard, because you could probably assume that the mites have been spread from one hive to the next. So if one has reached a critical point where there's too many mites, check the other ones and just kind of assume that they all have mites, but they may not all have that critical number, but they are going to have mites. In the fall, you want to make sure that you keep your mite level down going into the winter, because you can lose your whole colonies over the winter time. So if you have 50-60 mites on that board in 24 hours, you got way too many mites. You need to do something to cut that population down. Again, if you're doing the ether roll or the sugar roll, 5 to 10 mites or more, you need to do something to cut that population of mites down. And again, the brood of over 5 or 10%, you need to cut that population of mites down. It's really important, especially in the fall, that you keep those mites down. Okay, another, as far as control, I'm moving into the control now. If you've had problems with a lot of mites in a particular yard, it may be that you want to move your colonies to another site, because those mites are there. Mites are not just on honeybees, they're on bumblebees and solitary bees as well. So once the mites are in the environment, they're probably going to be there for a couple years until the mites crash. Until the bee population crash. You may have noticed the years that we had colony collapse disorder, that we lost so many bees. The mite population was actually lower the next couple of years after that, because there were no bees. So once the bees are out of the yard for a couple of years, you can probably move the bees back in, but just keep an eye on it, because the mites will move on to other bees as well. So that's one thing that you can do. You can also interrupt the mite cycle. Obviously, if there's no bee larvae, then the mites have nothing to feed on. So if we're going into that summer drought, the queen usually slows down on laying eggs. That would be a good time to requeen. So take that queen out and replace her in a week or two with a new queen, and it's usually just enough to break that mite cycle, so you don't have the mites developing in the colonies. Yes, I will be telling you about the treatment for the mites. That's the slide up ahead. You can use the smaller sized foundation. Each cell in the foundation is slightly smaller, so therefore the queen is going to be laying worker eggs in there instead of male eggs. And you can do the other way around, which I talk about that also, and lay male. You can put in a foundation for the males so that the queen is laying eggs that will become a male. You wait until that frame has been filled out with drone brood, put it in the freezer for a couple days, shake the brood off, and put it back in again, and you're therefore getting rid of most of the males on that particular frame. Most of the mites are in the male cells, because the males take a couple longer days. They take a little bit longer to develop, which is more advantageous to the mite. So most of the mites are going to be in the male developing larvae and not in the female. So we talked about requeening. You can get some of the hygienic queen stock. You're going to be paying more for that, but it may be better in the long run, because those bees are more likely to clean each other, and they actually rip the mites off of each other's back. So there's an advantage to that. Anything to encourage worker grooming. You can spritz them with sugar water. Yes, Linda. You can use the Russian bees. Russian bees tend to be a little bit better at cleaning each other than some of the other Italians or the Carniolans do. Again, we talked about grooming. The workers, these workers here are cleaning. There's a mite right there on that male. They actually look for the mites and rip them off. So that's another thing that you can do. These are probably cardamons here, just based on the orange, but I'm not quite sure. Both the Russian bees and the buckfast are more likely to clean each other and rip the mites off of each other. However, beware, because sometimes they can get kind of testy when they're a couple generations old. Both Ohio and West Virginia and Indiana all have their own queen rearing programs where they're raising bees that are more adapted to Ohio, and they're trying to encourage bees that are more resistant to mite problems. They are more likely to rip the mites off of each other's backs. So you can look into that as well. As far as physical control for bees, we talked about the screen bottom board, which increases your ventilation. What this person did, maybe not on purpose, but they have a frame in here that is not deep enough for the deep box. So the bees put all this extra honeycomb down here on the bottom. These are more likely to have the male larvae deposited in them. So you can actually break this off after there's male brood in here. Break that off and throw it away, and you're getting rid of the males, which are going to have the mites in them. Now you don't want to, I talk about that too, what they call drone brood trapping, which is using the frames that have the slightly larger sized cells. You can put 1 to 2 of these drone foundations per drone box. I would just do it when the mite population is high. You don't need to have it in there all season long. So a couple times in the spring and maybe in the fall, August. So to keep that mite population down, or at least it will help you to monitor for your mite population. Some people have tried experimenting with heating their hives, which will kill the mites. However, if you get too high, you're going to kill your brood. So it's a fine line there. So we have all kinds of chemical controls, which I'll talk about in more detail. These are check mite strips. But my thinking is that we need to alternate, use different products. Use the less toxic products. You can rely on the check mites and the check mites and the Apistan strips only if you have a really high population that you need to knock down fast. But throughout the season, there are other things that you can do to keep that mite population down. So we are talking about the thymol, which has actually had very good success. If it's a warm, we're going to have a warm week, which is not over 85 degrees. The thymol kind of has like a vapor action that you put in the colony. And that vapor action causes the mites to drop off the bees and fall through. HopGuard has been approved in Ohio. I don't know if Man Lake is carrying it yet, but you can get HopGuard. It's probably a little bit better for the bees than the formic acid. Formic acid is pretty strong, but both of these, if they're used correctly, you get pretty good drop of the mites that are loose. Keep in mind that 80% of the mites are in sealed brood, so you're only going to be losing the mites that are on the adult bees when you use these kinds of products. Typically the HopGuard or the formic acid will work once or twice. I've heard that HopGuard will work great 3 times, and then after that it doesn't work too well. Yeah, and I'll talk about the grease patties also. So for varroa control, the less toxic choices, one is just screen bottom board. You can keep that on year long. The drone cell foundation that I talked about, just the cells are slightly larger, so the queen's going to lay eggs that become drones. You take those out once they've been capped, knock them out, freeze them, knock them out, put them back in again, and that will help to reduce the mite population. Powdered sugar, you can get the bellows that some of the bee supply companies sell and kind of blow it through the front entrance. You can also just take about a half a cup and shake it between the frames in your brood boxes, It makes the bees slippery, so the mites will fall off. Requeening in the drought, basically just to stop that mite cycle. You can just take canola oil and soak Bounty paper towels. Put them into strips, and put 2 strips per brood box. So the bees eat that paper towel to get it out of the colony, and they get greasy in the process, and the mites fall off. Quick strips, this is formic acid. Just watch your temperature. Make sure that it doesn't get too hot. Even the day that you put it in, remember it may be in there for at least a week. If the temperatures get too high, you can kill your brood. I mean, it will kill the brood. And HopGuard, which has been approved now, is another effective tool that's not quite as bad, quite as toxic to the bees. These products, of course, you want to make sure that you follow the directions. You want to make sure that you don't have the honey on, because these products all have residue that will be left in the honey. These products, again, you want to watch your temperature with the thymol. Make sure that it doesn't get too hot while those products are in there. Either thymol that you use. What Dr. Johnson found out, that I think he's talked about later, if you use apastan strips and check mites the same year, the honeybees are not able to break those products down, and it can cause the colony to decline. So if you use apastan strips in the spring, don't use check mite strips in the fall. You can use other types of oil. You just don't want to use, you can use like a vegetable oil. The canola oil seems to be accepted by the bees more than the vegetable oil. So you don't want to use check mite and apastan the same year. I have a bee crawling on my arm. Moving on to tracheal mites. Any questions about that? Yeah, mineral oil would probably work also. The powdered sugar that gets into cells, I don't know how well it actually gets into those cells. Based on the reports from the USDA MD lab, they're not seeing a lot of tracheal mites anymore. So apparently the products that we're using to control varroa mites are also controlling the tracheal mites pretty well. These mites are actually invisible to the naked eye. They live in the tracheal tubes, which is like the breathing tubes of the bees. It causes the bees to be irritated. As you can imagine, if you can't breathe, they get irritated, and sometimes the bees will just take off and disappear. You can also see that K-wing, where the bees are holding their wings at kind of a strange angle. These are usually the worst in the summer and fall, and you can lose your bees where the colony just takes off and leaves when they're really disturbed. So that's when the grease patties come in. Grease patties can help to reduce varroa mite populations as well, but they're mainly for the tracheal mites. It's basically use some type of vegetable shortening. It's 2 parts granulated sugar to 1 part of vegetable shortening or lard. Make those into hamburger-sized patties, and you put them on the inner cover. And you can keep those on there year-round as long as you don't have any chemicals in there. And it gives the bees some extra sugar, and it also makes them greasy so that the mites will fall off. Some people have had success with mint oils because of that vapor action. However, there's no proof yet showing that it's actually effective. Other products that you can use for varroa mite, again, you want to make sure that you don't have honey supers on. We don't want to eat that stuff, and nor do the bees want to be feeding it to their larvae. So you do not want to have these products on when you have honey supers on. And again, the menthol patties basically works with the vapor action. Yes, small hive beetles do love grease patties, and I'll be talking about that too here. The check mites, the mite waste quick strips work really well for tracheal mites, as well as the check mite and the Apiary. Just make sure with these products that you don't put them in when it's going to get too hot, because it can really kill the brood. Okay, now I want to move on. I want to talk about the viruses a little bit, because this is fairly new information. All these viruses have been found to be vectored by the varroa mites. As far as the oiled strips, the paper towel strips going rancid, usually during the summertime the bees eat it quickly enough that it doesn't get rancid. But all these viruses are spread by mites, and they can all seriously affect the health of the colony. Deformed wing virus, by the time you see the symptoms, the deformed wings, that means that all the bees in the colony probably have that virus, and it's worse in the queen. She actually is affected more severely by this virus than the worker bees are. The IAPV, the Israeli acute paralysis virus, has been linked with colony collapse, as has the APV and the black queen cell virus. Ohio has the deformed wing virus, some IAPV, and the black queen cell virus. For the most part, those are the three that we've been finding. This is your typical virus spread within a colony. As the bees are feeding and cleaning each other, they're spreading the mites this way. The mites also will hitchhike on the backs from bee to bee, so they're spreading the virus just by moving around in the colony. They have also found out that the virus is in the queen and the drone. So when she's laying eggs, those larvae already had the virus in them. So you can imagine that by the end of the season, the virus load is really high. The bees want to have, ideally the bees want to have sun at least in the morning, at least all morning, and hopefully through 2 o'clock. They can have a little bit shade after that if they need to. So to minimize the impact of viral infections in your colony, it's just try to keep your bees as healthy as possible. I know, easier said than done. And keep an eye on the bees. You know, every couple of weeks, even if you can't get into the hive, look at the bees coming in. Make sure that you're not seeing bees being kicked out for some reason. Look to see if their wings are deformed. If you're seeing a lot of bees in the grass walking around that don't act right, that may be a symptom of a virus. Try to keep your mite population low all season long. Don't wait till it gets high and then treat it. If we go into a summer drought, you may have to feed the bees. Lately, the last 5 or 6 years, we've had to feed bees because there's no pollen out there, there's no nectar. Sometimes in the fall, if we have a lot of rainfall, that washes the pollen and the nectar out of the flowers, and the bees just don't have anything to bring in. Let's see, just reducing the mite population, trying to keep the hive, the apiary, as clean as possible. And then if the bees do start showing symptoms of viruses, they have found that the essential oils, such as Honey Bee Healthy, products that are labeled for bees, at least they seem to keep the bees' vigor up so that they can at least fight off secondary infections. They found that with the colony collapse, these bees have all kinds of secondary fungi and bacteria in their bodies, in the stinger, in the stomach, the digestive system, and all through the inside of them. So they're not able to fight these secondary diseases off. So I'm going to have to keep moving on here. We're going to run out of time. Nosema ceranae is the new Nosema that we've been dealing with. It's all through their stomach and digestive system. It builds up over the winter. Unlike the Nosema apis that we've had for years, this forms a dormant spore that remains in the colony. So in the wintertime, since the bees can't fly, sometimes if you have diarrhea, you're probably aware that sometimes you just can't hold it. Bees can't hold it either, and they will defecate in their colony. So those spores are there for other bees to pick up. They have found that Nosema ceranae is the dominant species now in the United States, far more than Nosema apis, and it has been linked with colony collapse also. The bees are not able to find their way back to the colony. They're weakened, just like we feel after a bad bout of diarrhea, we just feel like we're missing something in our diet. They're begging for food from other bees and spreading the spores that way. And it ends up being a spread all through the colony. So to try to keep that population, that infection down, try to improve the air circulation. This is one time where the bees need more sun. The Nosema is much worse in the shade. Try to reduce the stress if you can. It's easier said than done. You can treat them if Humidel B. Sometimes you can actually mix it correctly and spritz it right in the colony. If you find that they're not taking it in the sugar syrup, just spritz it right in the colony, right on the top bars, and so they'll lick it up that way. So they do a test at USDA saying that if they find 1 million spores of Nosema per bee, you need to treat. This year we found like 3 million, 5 million, 7 million spores per bee in Ohio. So check your bees, send them in, have them tested, find out what your Nosema level is for your bees. But they find it in all stages. It's in the bee, it's in the larvae, the pupa. They find it in the feces in the hive. If you see a lot of that black specking in the hive and the colony has died, you probably want to bleach those frames. Destroy the foundation, bleach the frames, or at least take those frames out and expose them to full sun. But I would want to bleach them first, so you're not spreading those diseases to other colonies. Other diseases that you're going to see possibly is chalk brood, where the brood look like chalk. That's usually cleaned up in the spring. This is a disease that's actually a virus. We usually kind of blow it off as a spring disease, but it is one of the viruses that has been found to affect the bees going into the winter time, and it can cause the bees to die. European foul brood, the problem that we're having with this is that there's several different bacteria that cause this. They have found some resistance with Thailand and terramycin with European foul brood. So if you're not getting good control using a Thailand or terramycin for European foul brood, first contact your county apiary inspector, get a sample sent off, make sure that you're dealing with European and not American foul brood, and we'll try to figure out what's going on. But depending on what bacteria are attacking the hive, you're going to have different symptoms. So again, just try to keep your colonies as healthy as possible. If the colony is not doing well and you can't seem to get them to recover, consider requeening it and find out what bacteria are affecting the hive. American foul brood, again, this is the most serious disease that we have affecting the bees still, where the larvae actually kind of melt down in the hive in the cells. The problem with this disease is that it forms these dormant spores, and these spores cannot be controlled by antibiotics. Once those spores are formed, they are in the environment for 75 years. So you can't just treat them with antibiotics. All it does is cover the symptoms. So I'm going to skip the wordy slide and show you the pictures. You're going to see the holes where the worker bees are trying to pull these dead larvae out. They try to carry them out of the hive to get rid of them. In the process, they spread those spores all through the colony. You're going to see this real checkerboard pattern like this, where the larvae have died. Not a good brood pattern at all, and they get this sunken, wet look. This is just a close-up of one of the larvae that has died. Turns like this coffee brown. It actually melts down in the bottom of the cell. So the first thing you're going to see are sunken cells. This is what the larvae look like when they have died. Usually they die after they've been sealed, but these guys in a severe infection, they've died before they even got sealed. I'm trying to speed up because I'm running out of time. So this is what you're going to see, these sunken, wet-looking cappings. And you're going to see, like in here, these brown larvae that have died. So if you see that, the best thing you can do with these colonies is to burn them, sadly. The diagnostic test for American foul brood is you take a stick or a toothpick or something, put it down in that cell where the brown larvae are, and if you pull it out and you get like that stringiness like that, that's American foulbrood. So contact your county inspector if you see this, and let's get rid of it before it spreads to all the colonies in your apiary. So if you have these sunken cells like that, that's American foulbrood. Once these cells have died, you can take that stick and put it down in there. You might pull out this white, it looks like scales like on a fish. That's American foulbrood. If it pulls out and it's brown and papery like the brown paper on a peanut, that's probably a European foulbrood. But we can cut a sample about 2 by 2, wrap it in newspaper, send it to USDA, and they can test that, determine what it is. So please, please, please buy contaminant-free equipment. Any equipment that's sold in an auction should have been checked by an inspector. You get a certificate of health showing that the boxes have been inspected, they're clean. Please clean and sanitize all your hands, your equipment before you leave the apiary. If you think it's infected, don't move it. Call your county inspector, or if you don't have a county inspector, call me, and let's find out what it is and get rid of it. But treating it with antibiotics does not kill that spore. It just masks the symptoms. So sadly, the only way to really get rid of those spores is to burn it. But it's better to burn two hives in your apiary than to lose the entire apiary, which in a couple of years the entire apiary will be dead. And once those hives cells or spores are there, they'll be there for 70+ years. Moving on to small hive beetles, this is my last one. We're seeing these in most of the counties in Ohio, especially the northern half of Ohio. You'll see these little rounded knobs on their antenna. The adults aren't that big of a problem, except that they're a nuisance. It's the larvae that cause the problem. The larvae, I got pictures of these. I even have better pictures coming up. But the larvae feed on the honeycomb. They actually dissolve the honeycomb. And I've got pictures of that. They eat the honeycomb, they eat the larvae, they eat the wax, and it actually melts and turns into this fermented mess. Basically, you lose your colony. I've got pictures showing this. This is how it just looks kind of dissolved or melted. This is what the larvae look like. You've got that little dark area right there and the rows of dots. If it's wax moth caterpillar, they're not wet like that, and you'll see the webbing, the cocoons and stuff. Small hive beetle larvae don't form those cocoons. So, I'm sorry, I'm going kind of fast. The main thing for you to keep in mind is when you take those frames off to spin them as fast as you can. Because if they sit in some kind of a container for a couple weeks, if there are small hive beetle larvae in there, they'll develop in there and they totally destroy your honey. So spin it as fast as you can. Try to reduce places where the hive beetles can be harbored. Any empty boxes, if you can, put them in a building of some type. Try to keep strong, vigorous bees. Those frame spacers that you have in your boxes, sometimes they have just enough space in there for the beetles to have places to hide. The bees will try to chase them off, but you get to the point there's so many beetles, they kind of give up. Don't leave frames out to be robbed. If you have spun your honey and you have these frames, actually put them right back on the hive. Put them in a box and put them back on the hive for the bees to clean out. Don't just let them sit out because it attracts bees. It attracts the beetles into your yard. And also if you have like rotting fruit, rotting tomatoes, whatever, pick them up. Okay, we were talking about this earlier. This is not a great picture, but this is a mega bee patty, and there's a small hive beetle on there. So if the bees are not actively eating those mega bee patties or grease patties or whatever, get them out of there, because you will get small hive beetles in there. And here's another picture showing them on the wax paper. Here this bee's got pollen right there, but she's trying to get rid of that larva as best as she can. But just be aware of that. As far as small as control goes, you can put the guard star around the base of in the soil, but the beetles are flying for miles away. So I really don't think that treating the soil alone is going to be enough. You don't want to have the hives there when you put that product down. So you got to move your hives, put the product down, put the hives back in. Meanwhile, the beetles are flying from miles away. The larvae can actually crawl a mile away before they find a place to burrow into the soil. So I don't really think that this is a good way to control them. The best way really is to put the traps in the wintertime or in the fall when they're starting to cluster. You can use these Freeman and the AJ Beetle Buster, similar traps like that you put between the frames. In the summertime, you can put the strips of cardboard on the bottom board. You can use all kinds of homemade traps. You can use a CD case that you slide on the bottom board. So we can talk about that in more detail. So there are lots of things available. The main thing is to try to keep that population down. But please follow the rules. If you're going to use Apistan strips or checkmite, use them the way they tell you to. If you only put one per box, you don't have it strong enough to knock the mites down, and they just build up resistance. And if you leave the strips in there too long, again the potency of the strips breaks down, and the mites become resistant. So please follow the law. Not only protect us, but to protect the bees as well. If you suspect that your bees have been poisoned by pesticide, collect them as fast as you can. Those pesticides break down within 24 hours, so you're not going to be able to find anything. Collect them, take some pictures. We can try to get them tested. There are independent labs that will do it. They're usually going to charge you for it, but try to find out what was used. If we find that there are Apistan or checkmate strips or some of the pesticide in the hive when there is honey supers on, be aware that you can be fined for that. So it's toxic for the bees and for us, but it's also potentially dangerous for you as the beekeeper. If they find more than 0.15 parts per million of coumaphos, which is checkmate in honey, we can be poisoned. Human beings can be poisoned, and bees are much smaller, so keep that in mind. If you suspected the bees have a disease, you can send them to the lab in Beltsville. You can go online to their website and get the directions on how to submit the sample. Africanized bees, the USDA in Tucson still tests for that, but for the most part, if the bees are very aggressive, you're probably just going to have to get rid of them. I'm doing a honeybee health survey to test for viruses. If you're interested, if you have more than 10 hives in one apiary or more, we test it for the viruses, both species of Nosema plus your other pests. It was free for you. It's part of a nationwide study to determine what viruses we have, not only in Ohio but around the United States. So if you're interested in that, contact me or contact Denise. And yes, I'm done. It's 9:56. So this is the page for more information, which Denise has on her front page. These are all online, so you can take your time to download these and look at them.